Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're speaking with Chris Bauer, who is joining us from the Milwaukee area. Chris is the CFO at Catapult Commercialization Services, a services company that does a lot of really cool things, working with brands on the commercialization process, R&D, setting up production and supply chain, as well as helping them scale and troubleshoot as they grow. I think, Chris is an expert in a number of areas in the CPG world, but we're definitely going to be focusing majority of the conversation on copackers. Just to kind of set the stage, just for the listeners that aren't as familiar with Catapult, Chris, maybe just give us quick lay of the land in terms of an origin story of the company, core services you guys offer, and then kind of maybe a bit about the structure of the org in terms of how you bring in different people into projects depending on what the focus is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I always appreciate the ability to have a conversation with someone. Catapult itself, we're 8 years old now. We were started on April 1st, which is always the best time to start a new business of 17. I've been with Catapult since the following year. And what it was is Jamie Valenti Jordan is our CEO and founder. He's worked for some of the larger groups in the world, right? The Campbells, the Del Montes, Milk Bones, those sorts of groups. And then he started working for smaller and smaller CPG groups. So he went from, as a process engineer, he went from a huge organization with multiple people in the same department launching new products down to a smaller level where he was the only one working on these technical operational side of things. And then he kept going down in size all the way to the point where he got asked, well, what's a process engineer and why do I need you? Which is an interesting question to have in an interview. So that's where the genesis of Catapult began, is how do we bring these technical services to smaller groups that don't necessarily have the financial wherewithal to add the headcount or don't have the need to add a full-time process engineer or whatever. So that's where Catapult is founded. It was started as a solo consultancy, and it now has grown to a group of 80 or so of us spread all across the United States. All of us have some sort of expertise in the food and beverage world, obviously, and then the commercialization side of things, more specifically, the technical side of things. So product ideation and brand positioning, kind of that fuzzy front end of figuring out what the brand wants to be when it grows up, into the product development phase, making sure that it checks all the boxes, it's food safe, it's ready to go into production across state lines, and then into all the bits and bobs that you need and actually to land on shelves. So contract manufacturing, which is my area, supply chain development and management, logistics, packaging, quality, regulatory, certifications, all of that. And then it gets back into process engineering, right? Because all of this just becomes an iterative thing to drive down COGs, drive up production.
Yeah.
And so just kind of keep growing the business and the industry. So how we work is actually somewhat different. Most, if not all, clients come to us with some sort of problem, some sort of pain point. We're looking to grow beyond the commercial kitchen, for instance. Can you help us do that? Well, great. Here are the steps that you need to do, and here are the different experts that Catapult can pull on in order to make that work. You're working under cottage law, you want to sell across state lines, great. We have to bring in a product developer to make sure that your supply chain is redundant, is good and industrially sourced, and then we can also help you find the co-man and negotiate with them, on board with them, because that's all a process, and I'm sure we'll get into that here shortly. Or it's a larger group. We are having this problem. We need someone to fly out to California tomorrow to look at what's going on and why we have insects in our meal and figure out where they came from and figure out how to fix it going forward. We've done that project too, where we had someone on site within 2 days to figure out what happened and do an after action report. You don't want to necessarily hire a person to be able to do that, year round, right? You don't want to add headcount. So let's just bring in an expert and take care of the problem. And I can keep going, but I don't want to bore everyone. But the idea is
Catapult's a CPG fixer, kind of, to a certain extent.
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. Like, what is your problem? Here's the general steps on how you solve it. Here are the experts that we need to get it done. And then we provide an estimate, of course, and say, great, it's going to take 100 hours of work. Boom, there's how long it's going to take and your budget too.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Man, yeah, it sounds like you come in when founders and operators are having really big challenges. I feel like you're probably the saving grace for a lot of operators. So it's cool what you guys do.
The interesting thing is that people who know us absolutely love us because we do exactly that. And then they don't tell anyone else because we become their secret sauce. Great, we have a new problem. Let's go talk to Chris and figure out how we fix it. All right, so let's do this. So yeah, absolutely. We are the secret sauce of a lot of small.
Yeah. Starting out from the first stages, starting with just sourcing and evaluating copackers. What would you say are the best ways to actually just go about sourcing copacker options, and where are the best places to look, whether it's like events directories, those kind of things? Because from what I know, copackers don't have often the best websites. They don't really market themselves all that well, so it doesn't seem like it's the easiest type of business to find. So we'll start there.
Yeah, absolutely. When I joined Catapult, it was my first foray into the food and beverage industry, and Jamie was telling me that it's really just kind of like a boys club, right? You have to know them, know where co-mans are in order for you to know that they even exist. A lot of them are very technically minded, and some of them are very brilliant, but that's not in marketing, right? That's not something that you can find easily.
Yeah.
So it takes time. It takes reaching out to them over multiple things, or at least that's the reason why I'm able to charge money for what I do, because the process itself is not rocket science. It's building out a list as long as you can from all the different sources, right? There are lists that exist online. There are event directories. There's, hey, did you ever meet Bob? Bob does this. And just talking through with someone, be like, great, this is what I'm working on. And they're like, oh, yeah, George is just down the street. He's been in business for 30 years. He doesn't have a website.
Right.
Okay, great. Does he have a phone number? I've literally had to fax people information in order to get it into the hands of the right person, which is very strange to say in 2020. At the time was 2023, but it's just one of those things where I'm like, okay, great. I guess I'll figure out how to use a fax now. But yeah, absolutely. It's everything.
Yeah.
Just building out that network, building out a reputation of just knowing who to talk to is the critical piece there.
People that are at the center of the hub and spoke, so they've got a lot of network and kind of they can point you in a direction, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just say you're a new operator, found a copacker that seems like to be a good fit based on, let's just say, recommendations or research that you've done. From what I know, it seems like copackers that are good copackers, they're probably close to capacity with bigger clients. They've been working with us for a long time. Onboarding a small new brand, integrating them within their operations and workflow and everything is not always probably the easiest and fun thing to do. So generally what I've heard is it can be challenging to kind of get a copacker's attention and get you to give them the time of day, give you the time of day. So I'm curious, what would be, 2 to 3 points that a brand owner could use or focus on when they're reaching out to copacker to make it sound like, okay, this is a real brand, this is a real person, and this, I'm the copacker side, I'm actually going to give these people the time of day.
The trick of that is to realize that these are businesses, right? And I'll kind of hit this over and over, right? And if they're a successful business, they're going to be really busy. So the first thing is every single time that you interact with them, realize that they also have about 30 other things going on in their mind. So you have to be exceptionally to the point because you have about 30 seconds before their mind wanders on to the next one, especially if you're just doing a cold email. Right. So you have to be very precise. This is what I'm looking for. These are the certifications. This is the process. This is the volume. This is the size of the prize. Are you interested? Let's talk about it. Once you get in front of them, they generally have more time and attention. But if you're not actually talking directly to them, talking to their gatekeeper, for instance, or to just cold emailing them, you really just have to realize that they're humans that are very, very busy. And then as they ignore you because you're number 42 on the list of 100 emails that they have to respond to.
Right, of course.
And you transition from a cold email to a follow-up call or to connecting with them in LinkedIn or anything like that, realize that they're not going to respond to you right away and that it takes a couple of times. Be like, hey, I get that you're busy. I'm here. This is the project. Are you interested? And the answer will likely be no, right? It's going to be a numbers game to an extent because they might not have capacity. You might have misunderstood their capabilities. They might just be having a bad week, and they have an audit and a Fortune 500 company in the building at the same time in a day. Like, I've had that happen too. That happens, right? It's going to take time. I always recommend that it takes about 6 months, 6 to 9 months from introduction to actually getting to the point of being able to have product in hand.
Yeah.
And that's can be on the aggressive side, depending on the part of the industry that you're in.
Yeah. The complication, how complicated the formulation and touch points are and everything too, right? Yeah.
Or just the nature of the product too, right? Like there's barriers to that too.
Totally. Yes, they've gotten attention of a copacker. Now it's kind of on even footing. The copacker's really engaging them. Feels like, they're getting the real attention. Now it's kind of on the brand a bit to be doing some real evaluation and due diligence. Like, what should that copacker evaluation checklist look like? And, I guess what are just some of the most important factors that a brand should be considering to make sure that they're going to be dependable and a good fit and all those things?
Yeah. As you work through, right? So typically, as I hand off the relationship to my clients and the co-man, the next steps are usually doing a data transfer, right? Get them samples, get them the formulation, get them your list of ingredient suppliers. The quicker that you can get that to them, the quicker that they can put that in the queue, right? Because some co-mans literally don't start until they have all of those things. And if they don't, you're just going down on the queue because you're less of a serious client.
Sure.
After that, like, you can realistically expect them to want to test it on their machines, right? A thing that I call test day. And that takes time to schedule and to be there. That's really where you want to make sure that you're also there, if at all possible, to sit there and just talk with them. Realize that they're human, make them realize that you're human, walk the line with them if you can, right? You shouldn't be seeing extreme examples. You shouldn't see rats flying through. You shouldn't see big puddles of water just standing there, not getting cleaned up, right? That's the type of level that you want to be at that first meeting in person QA side. Other than that, it's making sure their documentation is in order, making sure that they're being reasonably responsible in getting back to you. Again, they're very busy people. And then making sure that at the end of that test day, the product that is coming out is what you want, and that you've written down how you got there, right? Because test day, they're going to try 50 different ways of doing it, right? Are we cooking it for 18, 19, or 20 minutes? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? So that way, once it's all written down, you can trust that the co-man, so long as they adhere to that product spec, they're going to be doing it right every single time. And that's exactly what you want out of co-man. And the good contract manufacturers know that. They'll adhere to that, and they'll make sure that it's exactly the same thing 100% of the time.
Yeah. All those make total sense. That's really helpful. All right. So Brain gets through that due diligence process. They like the copacker. They're getting to the point of negotiating terms and actually putting things on paper and putting together an actual contract. What do you feel like are some of those top of mind things that are most important to include in that copacker agreement, just to ensure success, minimize the risk, and really aligning expectations from the get-go?
Working through all of those things one at a time, right? Figuring out what your entire logistics chain looks like, from ordering supplies and ingredients, landing it, where is it going to be, how much does that cost, right? That's another thing that you're always going to want to keep an eye on, is where are your packages being stored? Where are your trays being stored? Are they branded? Are they safe? And how much does that cost? Going into each individual thing, how much they might throw it all together as one lump sum cost all in, and that's fine. Others line it all out, right? How much is it? How much is the cost of the facility? How much is the cost of the employees? How much is the cost of storage on the front end and the back end? Because you're not always going to have a truck right there for them to load each pallet on individually, and that would be kind of expensive and silly to do it that way. So having all of that kind of spelled out in a fair way in the contract is important. I mean, don't be necessarily rude and demanding about it because, again, they're humans. And this is more akin to dating than it is a marriage or just a straight business deal. You have to want to make sure that you work with them. Other high points that you want to make sure that you pay attention to: who owns the IP, right? One thing that I have encountered multiple times is groups try to take the shortcut. They try and say, great, I have grandma's recipe. Can you make 1 million of them for me? The co-man might have a product developer. They might not, depending on what their infrastructure looks like. And they might be willing to front that cost to you. But always make sure you know who owns the IP. If you're not paying for it, the likelihood is that it's the co-man's IP because they're paying for it. That's theirs now. So there have been several examples where the client's relationship with the co-man was going great for several years. Something happened. It's spoiling. And now they want to move to a new copacker, but they took the shortcut in the beginning. They don't actually own the IP. They have to regenerate their own product, which is a position to be in that is not particularly good. So know where the IP is.
Yeah.
And the last piece, I completely blanked on. When things go wrong, right? Because things will go wrong, right? Someone will cook it for 22 minutes instead of 19, and suddenly you burned an entire batch of something. Mistakes happen. So making sure that there is a well spelled out way of reconciling that, figuring out how to work together in order to fix it and to move forward. That's done in a fair way, because co-mans are always going to walk. They're at least going to balk. They might walk away from a deal that is too stacked in the brand's position, right? And the brand should do the same thing if it's too stacked in the co-man's position.
Yeah.
And that sort of negotiation is always kind of touchy, right? Because you don't necessarily trust the other person across the table for you. So having someone there with you to kind of go through it is useful.
Yeah. You mentioned IP a little bit. I was going to ask about that in terms of protecting IP. And let's just say you did go the correct route, whether you developed that formulation with a copacker and you paid for that IP or whatnot, or you brought a formulation that you developed somewhere else to that copacker. I guess, how do you prevent that, formulation magically ending up in the hands of another one of the copacker's clients with like a very small minimal tweak that makes it not totally stealing IP? Or I've also heard about here and there, a copacker decides to launch their own in-house brand after a while, or maybe they didn't have in-house brands before and they decide they're going to, they always have. And then somehow, that brand finds out, the formulation of their own in-house branded products are basically almost identical to theirs. Like, I'm sure you can't entirely prevent it, but I guess how can brands think about that in terms of minimizing the risk of that, let's say?
Sure. And I have this conversation with clients regularly, right? They say, great, I want to make 10,000 cookies a month. No problem. We can do that. I want to be the only one who makes chocolate chip cookies in that facility because my formulation is so special. I don't want it stolen, that sort of thing. That's not going to fly, right? This is a business. They're going to need to use these ovens in all sorts of different ways. The IP rights and how that IP is protected should be in your contract as you're talking through this with your co-man, right? Where is it going to be stored? How is it going to be defended? How does that all work? Then you realize that co-mans are going to be here even when you're not. They were here when you were not in existence.
Right.
And they are making effectively the same way. They might know ways to make your chocolate chip cookie better than you do because they've made billions of them. So that comes with a fair amount of expertise. And there's only so many ways to make a chocolate chip cookie, right? There's only so many ways to make anything, right? So the brand also have to realize that, one, they've been in existence in a business a long time. If they're just giving away or stealing other people's IP in order to give it to someone else, that's not going to work for them long term. They're going to get sued. They're going to get closed down. They're going to develop a reputation in the industry where that's exactly what happens. And they're going to be shunned, rightfully so, if that's what's happening. So realize that their reputation is online and their reputation is probably more valuable to them than your business. And that's okay. Then the final thing is realize that there are groups out there and their job is to literally take a product off the shelf, reverse engineer it, and then make a small tweak so it's not the exact same thing, and then sell it off to whomever wants to do it, right? How many chocolate chip cookies are there? Great. We can make a different one. We'll make it a little bit saltier this time, or we'll do something else about it. In that case, the thing that you're selling, and brands sometimes have to realize this, the thing that you're selling is not your chocolate chip cookie. And I swear I'll stop using chocolate chips as the example, but it's not a chocolate chip cookie anymore. It's your brand. And it's the following that you've developed. That's the important thing. People will buy your brand over someone else's brand. And realizing that that marketing is the thing that keeps you sustaining, even when Me Too products come on board. Because if you're completely new and you do all sorts of things that are astonishingly new and it's successful, someone's going to rip you off. They're going to make it, right? Oreo made one to whatever the thing was before Oreo, and they're more successful than the original brand.
Right.
Okay, that happens. That other brand that remains nameless because I can't think of it right now. Okay, they didn't have the same marketing skills as Oreo.
Right. Yep. All those, yeah, those are really valid. I think that's a good reality check, I would say. How about from a projecting COGs and margins in terms of how you're working with your co-packers? What are some of those you've seen the most common hidden line items that can balloon total landed costs, whether it's, you mentioned storage costs if you're not picking it up right away, or maybe it's, testing costs, that kind of stuff. Like, what should brands, I guess, try to address up front in that co-packer agreement, and or just be, keeping a close eye on in general?
Sure. And this is where it really gets very fuzzy in almost any contract negotiation, because it becomes very specific to the product and how all these things. Do you need to take it and send it for testing every single time? Can we do it in-house, right? How long does it take to, and how expensive is it to land all of the equipment, or not the equipment, the supplies and the food and the ingredients,
Right.
right? All the inputs, right? How long does it take to amass all those things? How much does that cost? On the flip side, how quickly can you get a truck there to pick up your 10 pallets of product and get it to somewhere else? These are a lot of variables that can be controlled through the contract, right? So making sure that you work through the entire process of where does it come in, what and how should it all be put together, when does it go through, how much does that cost, and then all the different pieces. And then there are going to be a whole bunch of things that you don't get to control, right? You don't get to control the price of milk or eggs, right? You don't get to control tariffs. You don't get to control the cost of labor because minimum wage jumps legally in the state that you happen to be producing in. You don't get to control those. Those are all things even outside of the control of the co-man, and that's going to be passed on to you, the brand.
Yeah.
So how do you mitigate that? If you can figure that part out better than anyone else, you should be in my shoes.
Fair
Because
enough.
locking a co-man into a contract that limits all those things, they're not going to do it.
Right.
Not if they're smart. And if they do, good on you.
Right. How about
just working.
the take or pay minimums specifically? I've heard those can be challenging for brands. Basically, they're not, I'm correct if I'm wrong, if I'm defining take or pay incorrectly here, but it's basically, whether it's in the agreement or not, basically you're securing certain line time at the co-packer. And if you don't use it because you're, projecting forecasts are meaning that you're still going to pay for that line time, essentially, whether using it or not.
Yeah. Yes, it's challenging, particularly for small brands. 100%. How do you avoid it? You match it as best you can. So there's two ways that minimum order quantities really get created. One is it takes so many gallons of liquid in order to pressurize the machine so that I can get it into your bottle.
Yeah.
That you're not going to mess with, right? You have to go to a smaller co-man if you are going to try and play with those minimums. There is no alternative physically on how to do that.
Yeah.
The one that you do have more flexibility with is working your way through other things, right? So typically the other way that you can establish a minimum order quantity is how many widgets can you make in 6 hours? Because it's going to take an hour to set up the line. It's going to take an hour to clean up the line. There's your 8-hour shift. Boom. How many widgets can we make? Now, if you only need 3 hours of production, sure, the co-man can do that for you, but you're still going to pay for that full 8 hours because no one's going to work for them for 3 hours just making your widget. So it's more of a match, making sure that you're matching their minimum order quantities and you're not going to really huge groups for small stuff, right? That's just not going to work. The other thing that I've seen is are people, and people get good by doing the same thing over and over, right? So the more that you can get your production together and replicate it once a month, for instance, there are co-mans out there that do it once a month, once a quarter, once a year is really kind of difficult. Or can you bring those 4 days, 5 days of production all together? Does your shelf life support it? And sometimes the answer is no, and that's unfortunate for you. But a lot of times the answer is yes. All right. The difference between a loaf of bread that has been frozen for 5 months versus a loaf of bread that has been frozen for 1 month, the common consumer is not going to notice that. Why not make it all? Sure, you have more costs in terms of keeping it frozen for that long.
Sure. Right.
But that usually is a wash or in the brand's advantage to bring it together as opposed to worrying about minimum order quantities. The other flip side to your take and pay idea is some parts of the food and beverage industry simply require higher minimums. The plant-based milks and the plant-based creamers, those are exceptionally difficult to get into because of the techniques used to get them to be shelf stable at ambient temperature. And you're going to have to start with 7, 8-digit numbers in terms of volume in order to have any co-man be interested in you. So just choosing the right product if you're in the right venue, whether it's refrigerated or frozen or shelf stable at ambient, is all going to be part and parcel to making sure that you're even in the right part of the industry for your size. Or if you have to figure out different ways of doing it too.
Right. Totally. Yeah. That's super helpful too. It sounds like a lot of brands are coming to you when they're in kind of pivot points or their business or challenges as well. So I'm curious. I imagine it might be a pretty common scenario where a brand that's in the earlier stages, they've been just self-manufacturing, whether it's in their, probably not in their kitchen, they're probably beyond that, but maybe in like a, shared commercial kitchen where they're still doing it themselves. And now they're getting to the point they come to you and say, hey, we're at the scale, we can't do this anymore. We need to transition to a copacker. Can you help us? I'm curious, what have you found is the most often challenging part, whether it's having to change the formulation to optimize for scale or just different, manufacturing processes that have to be do at scale versus what you can do in a small kitchen. What have you found is the most challenging part of this? And how does Catapult, how do you guys help with that process overall?
You're really not going to like this answer. The most challenging part of all of that is actually realizing that the brand is not paying the individual, right? So a lot of groups, as they're going into their first co-man, they're self-producing commercial kitchen, no big deal. I'm just going to do it on my weekends when I have the day off, and I'm just going to get it done. No problem. You're not going to get away with that with a co-man. The co-man needs to pay themselves. So that would be number one. Can Catapult help with that? No. What Catapult can do is all the other pieces that you're talking about. If you're working out of a commercial kitchen under cottage law, so you're just going to Costco and buy flour and you're bringing it in, that's great. You can do that. But once you get to a co-man, that game changes. They have to have formulations. They have to have it in the right way. They have to have industrial suppliers. They have to have all of their documentation in order. And that's the type of challenge that Catapult excels in, is figuring out all of those things.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then, but yeah, I think the best example I have of both of those is actually a co-man that came to me and they wanted to stop being a co-man. They just wanted to convert from being a co-man into being a brand. No problem. Here's, I go through my search. Here's a dozen different groups that can do the same thing that you can more or less in your area. And they ended up rejecting them all. And there's a co-man to this day. Why? They were underpaying their management, right? Their leaders. And two, while they had the formulations, they were doing it roughly as efficiently as anyone else was, so that you weren't saving all that much in employee costs and that sort of thing. I still call them to this day and say, hey, do you want this gluten-free bread or whatever?
Yeah.
Because they're still in business. They were, I don't know if they're doing it now, but they were underpaying themselves. They didn't shutter their doors and then hope to make that leap, right? Yes, absolutely. And we had that conversation too at the onset. And we're like, I mean, you're doing this, you're making it work. Like, And you figured out the hard part, which is how to be a manager of individuals on a process that has to be replicated 100% of the time. That's the part that you're paying for, is that expertise and that machinery and that mortgage and those lights and.
Moving down the chain a bit, Brand has kicked off things with the copacker. They're starting to kind of get in a regular cadence. What do you recommend to your guys as clients in terms of what should a kind of ideal, let's just call it KPI dashboard, look like in terms of the core metrics that this brand should be closely tracking in terms of the copacker output?
Sure. On the product side, it should be keeping an eye on any complaints that come in. Hey, this bread that you've been making suddenly tastes different, right? That's an indication of something going very wrong at the co-man level. Other than that, are they meeting their deadlines? If you're doing it just in time, is everything arriving just in time? Are they scheduling you regularly enough and efficiently enough that you're meeting all of these things? Noting that if you have a sudden explosion in demand for whatever reason, a marketing sales thing goes well, they're not going to be able to pivot as quickly as you would like them to, but being able to have things arrive when you need it to would be the first one. Consumer experience should stay the same, right? You shouldn't be seeing swings up and down, right? That's indication of something going wrong at the co-man. On the financial side, keep an eye on the COGs. Are they staying reasonable and about the same each time? Is it trending upward, or trending downward? Sometimes co-mans get more effective and more efficient the more they do run your product, so they can actually produce more widgets during that same 8-hour period. And that's something that you should be having regular conversations with your co-mans on. Hey, I'm noticing this. What is causing the COGs to go up? Well, flour's going up or eggs are going up. Like, this is out of our control and we're buying it for you. So, I mean, those would be the two.
Those make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Those two things that I would want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, those make a lot of sense. And how about just from a kind of like S&OP process cadence standpoint, do you typically find it's probably also, this comes down to how often copackers are willing to meet with you as well, but in terms like from a cadence S&OP standpoint, do you typically find you're recommending, or most common, is it, monthly, biweekly? Is it even like weekly, or is it something else?
Realistically, however often you're running the product in their facility, you should probably have one, just a check-in meeting. It might be only half of an hour, right? Just running through, hey, anything change? Nope, good, lovely, let's move on. Yeah. So they don't need to meet with you bi-weekly if you're running once a month.
Yeah.
They don't need to necessarily meet with you monthly if you're doing it quarterly.
Yeah.
And again, those sorts of things, or at least the option to have those sorts of meetings, should be outlined in your contract. Like, we want to have a 30-minute meeting before launching any product just to update you on what's going on. That would be a reasonable enough point to keep in there. I would expect to see setting it up a little bit different, right? More time on site, more time setting things up. But once things start getting going and rolling, it's more check-ins, making sure that everything is going well, making sure that management over there is staying stable, right? Because if you have a new management, suddenly they read your standard operating procedure in a different way than the previous person did. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. That happens. But also, why isn't your SOP being correctly? Right. So.
Totally. Yep. Those all make a lot of sense too. From a risk planning standpoint, I think it's probably, especially with this tariff situation coming into account, it's more top of mind in some of the conversations you're having with your clients. But I'm curious from how important is redundancy and supplier diversity, let's say, and then kind of a building on that question is like, what does supplier diversity actually look like? Is it just having a few backups, or is it more strategic than that?
That's where it starts, right? There's currently several projects that are ongoing that are just looking at different suppliers and then testing it, both at the bench and then also testing it in production, making sure that they react the same. So that way, when one flour that's being produced in, I don't know, the Ukraine has problems generating that grain in that flour, you have a US-based facility that's able to help out, or you have a Canadian facility that's able to help out. And that's, a Wise brand has that in place, especially as they scale up, despite whether or not we're worried about tariffs, because who knows the next time a country invades another country and throws everything into chaos, or, anything else. So how does all of that work? A wise brand usually has a couple of options in their back pocket, able to work on, and they check regularly in like, well, has the prices changed at all? Like, what's the harvest looking like in Florida for oranges as opposed to somewhere else? Just kind of keeping tabs on that and working their way through. Does it have to be, if oranges get over this price, then we're going to this? Does it have to be that precise? No, not necessarily, especially not if you're a small brand. It can be much more of a, I know these two things work, and I'm going to go with it, whichever one makes sense at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the co-man should be able to help with that too, because if they're bringing in flour for you, they're bringing in flour for someone else too.
Once a brand has scaled to a certain scale, they've been growing for a while, things are going really well. Yeah, the margins are good. They've got access to some fair amount of CapEx at pretty reasonable terms and whatnot. For those brands where vertical integration, moving away from copacker that they're working with for a long time, would make a lot of sense, whether it's at some point they may be able to save costs, bringing it in-house or whatnot. When, from your experience or knowledge, when does it usually make sense to start looking at bringing manufacturing back in-house, let's say? And maybe never, but
the answer may be never for any sort of brand, right? The startup costs of building your own facility absolutely need to be considered. So if you are in UHT aseptic fill, those, you have to be very, very large in order for those costs to make sense. They have to, their barriers to entry are very high to begin with, right? So you have to make sure that makes sense. But to get to your point, like, when does it make sense? There's no good answer for that. The question then becomes, is the margin that the co-man putting into their costs for you, right? Does that starting to impede in your margins? Or is it just an ego power play where I'm like, well, I can take that 40% and put it in there. And if that's where you're at, that's great. That's a wonderful place to be in. And there are several brands that I've worked with that are looking like, I just want to make sure that this is a product that can sell, and then I want to build up my own facility. Wonderful. It's about where the business is and where the skill sets of the individuals in that brand are.
Yeah.
I have met brands that under no situation should they ever run their own facility because they do not have the personality type that it takes to be an ops person. They're a marketing person and they're a salesperson. Great, go do that. Have a co-man make it for you. And if you want to eventually buy that facility, as one of our clients recently have, okay, great, good, have at it. But at what point does that change? It changes at the point where the margins no longer make sense to give away, and you want to bring that in-house.
Yeah.
And that will change dramatically based on what part of the industry you're in and the complexity of the process.
Sure. For those ones where it does may make sense, what I assume you just don't want to do it cold turkey and just like immediately shut down the co-packing, and what is the kind of if you had to make a recommendation from a step-by-step process as an example, is that you start maybe sourcing your own ingredients first, you get that under your belt and you're sending those to the co-packer, then maybe you start producing 30% of your overall SKU count, some certain portion of your SKUs in-house, and still keeping some at the co-packer, and then you eventually transition the rest of them. Yeah, I'm curious, what does that kind of step-by-step process look like in your mind?
We're going to assume in this example that we have to build our own facility, right? We have to buy a piece of property. We have to land the equipment. We have to do that. That does not happen overnight. That's anywhere from 1 to 2 to 5 to 10 years, right? Depending on what exactly you're making. Realistically, 2 years from start to finish, right? So how does that process look like? First, build the business case, right? Run the numbers. Does it actually make sense? How much does each piece of equipment that you're going to cost come out to be? And that's where Catapult would be very useful to a brand like that, because we can come in and be like, great, you're making orange juice. You need this machine, this machine, this machine, this machine. Here are all the costs associated with it. Here's what line you're looking for. Here's how much it's going to cost not to buy the product or buy the machines, but also land it, commission it, make sure it's good to go. Here are all the other pieces that you need to have in place. So you're looking at a $10 million facility. You're looking at a $100 million facility, right? And then the brand would then have to make sure that it is viable for them. So the first thing is actually just plan it out all on paper, without without looking for land necessarily or anything like that. And then there really isn't a wonderful way of introducing it stepwise, right? Because once you have the machines, you want it running 24/7 because otherwise you just have idle line time and that's just a cost on you. So you land the machines, you land them, you commission them, and then you start production. You start with whatever makes the most sense to bring it in. Let's bring in one SKU, let's run it, let's compare the two. Does the co-man still make it better and why? Or does mine and why? And then after that, it's just a very rapid transition in. Transitioning ingredient sourcing to you has to be built into that. And then where are you going to store it? Where are you going? All of these things, right? But yeah, I mean, it's going to be jumping in very rapidly once you execute the paper exercise. The paper exercise is where you figure out whether or not you even want to do it or can do it.
Yeah, fair. Coming back to IP a little bit, are there any other typical
Models?
those kind of joint structure that you see, whether it's like, if they're applying patents, is it like you're applying for patents together, or they're, I don't know if there's like royalty structures or like joint venture or something along those lines, or is it mostly just as simple as, pay us X dollars and you can keep the formulation?
In my opinion, the right way of doing it is pay us X amount of dollars, get it done, let me own the IP, right? It might just be my own mentality of like, I need to know who owns that IP because tomorrow we might have a problem and I need to go somewhere else. So everything else is a derivation of that. So do we want to sign a contract? You'll give me a deal if I sign a contract and I make 1 million of these things and you're going to make your money of product development back in that way. Yeah, that's a way to do it that is cheaper, but then you're just handcuffing yourself to that co-man for a longer and longer point of time.
Yeah.
There is the royalties model where, great, I'll develop it, I'll own it, and then I'll license it to you to build the brand around it. That's usually the co-man talking to the brand. Yeah, absolutely, if you want. But again, you're handcuffing yourself to that co-man necessarily because they own the IP. The IP is in my opinion, is the only thing that matters at the end. So knowing how to do that and how you want to take a less expensive option in the beginning in order to make sure it gets done and gets done well, that's all up to that negotiation. But again, that should be in the contract, right? Make it black and white and hopefully not in the fine print.
Yeah. Super clear. Last question for you. This is a very broad question, but I just know you and Catapult in general, you guys have so many conversations with so many different brands and different parts of the CPG space. I'm curious, any specific brand that you want to mention, or just general trends in the CPG space that you're particularly excited about, or ones that you're seeing are gaining a lot of traction?
I always joke with my colleagues in the co-man world that for whatever reason, I'll have 5 or 6 products that are all very similar, trying to come to market at the same time period. So I'll reach out to the same co-mans 5 or 6 times within 3-4 months. And then I'll just go quiet for a year, 2 years even. And then before I have another product in that same space, it always seems to come in waves.
Interesting.
So the wave that I'm seeing right now coming through are individuals or brands generally, who are looking to take all sorts of products, right? Beverages, chocolate, anything else like that. And they're trying to make it a better for you product by including vitamins or probiotics or something like that. So that's the trend that I'm seeing on the Catapult side. And they're kind of all scattered all over the place. They might be in the formulation stage. They might be in the co-man stage, right? All these different things. But that's the thing that's going on right now, right? And that's very interesting to me for a variety of reasons. 6-7 months ago, it was a different thing. It was puddings, whatever reason. So it always comes in waves. It's very interesting, but products that fall on that really gray area between food and supplement is what's popular right now from my vantage point.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I've definitely seen like that. Yeah, that's definitely
yes. Yeah, the society itself has it goes in different ways, and that's how it works. So,
yeah,
which is good. Good for
them. I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, not at all.
Well, yeah, Chris, this has been awesome. I really appreciate the time. I think this has been really valuable for brands, especially are in this process of, starting to think about copackers and working copackers, or in the middle of one and trying to figure out some challenges. So I think it's been super helpful. What's the best way for people to follow along with you, and or what's the best place to people to follow along with Catapult as well?
Sure. The easiest way for a lot of people to keep in touch with Catapult and see what we're up to is actually through LinkedIn. Our CEO, Jamie, has a fairly large following in the food and beverage world, and he kind of regularly produces posts and that sort of thing to kind of keep people abreast of what Catapult is up to, what he's up to, what are the different trends in society, answering questions, that sort of thing. I think you and I met originally through Startup CPG, which is another wonderful organization to kind of keep track of what's going on in the industry. And then also Catapult has a solid presence there, just answering questions. Hey, I'm doing this. Great. Here's the general thing. And if you want more, let's talk about that offline. And then, of course, there's always our website, catapultserve.com, that people can always look us up and find our immediate contact information there.
All right, cool. That sounds great. Well, yeah, Chris, really appreciate the time, and hope you have a great day.